Okay folks, what we're going to do here today is show you how to overhaul the Model A transmission. The Model A was similar all 4 years that it was built. There were some minor differences which we're going to show you later on, but we're going to disassemble it, inspect it, check all the parts that need to be replaced, obtain all the parts that we need to be replaced, and then reassemble it for you. So that's what we're going to do today. Okay, what we're going to do first is take the cover off, take the universal joint off. In many cases, when you do get it out of the car, they already have the cover off already. And as soon as you look into them, you get a pretty good idea of what condition they're in. This came out of a, was it 1928?
I think the 28, yeah.
Phaeton.
Yep.
Although it was a 28 Phaeton, this is no longer a 28 transmission. Chances are it has been rebuilt before. There was only 1 or 2 original gears in it, but it's a later case. And I'll show you the differences in the early and later cases as we go.
So what does it take to remove the tower? Is it just the bolts on the...
Actually, there's in the cover there are 4 short bolts and 2 long ones. The 2 long ones are right up in the front. Early speed wrench. And the top cover just lifts straight off. Almost, they say. There we go. Okay, that's it. Now that we got it open, you can see all the gears inside. The next thing you want to do is take off the universal joint. This has been off already, but on a U-joint, it does have a very special bolt and washer assembly. It's got a little lock that goes into one of the spines in the back. When you do overhaul one of these things usually get pretty well beat up, so every time you do one, purchase a new one. This is the new universal joint. This particular transmission had one of the worst worn U-joints that I think that I've ever seen. This is a leftover from the Model T. These trunnions that are on it are one solid piece, and they just rubbed around about the framework. These have bearings, cup bearings, and there's all needle rollers inside here. And this is what they had till the end of production. These went out around late 28, 29. And when you first get it, these bolts are safety wired. So you have to cut the wire first before you can get this is known as rear bearing retainer, this portion of the U-joint housing. I might point out one other thing on these 4 rear bolts that's a bit odd. They are special because they have to be wired. You don't want these coming loose behind the U-joint. You get a lot of vibration back in here. If you work with engines and transmissions and cast iron, you know that usually when they work with cast iron, you use coarse threads. This bolt is a fine thread. And if you go tapping, chasing any of the holes, when you take things apart to clean things up, you got to remember you pick up the right thread, otherwise you'll ruin the gearbox. Here's the last bolt out of it. Probably stuck with paint again, as on the other one. Okay. And there is a gasket in here. Another thing I might point out about this rear cover, this is an early cover. The spacing between all of these bolt holes are not even. They're not equal. There's 2 wide ones, and all the rest are even. I'll see if I can show this to you on the gasket. You notice these 2 holes here? They're elongated, so that this will work on the early cover as well as the late cover. Also, the universal joint housing has to match as well. This upper section is part of the wide angle. Oops. Okay. It's made so it will fit both. And as long as you use the right combination, it doesn't matter. They'll fit any transmission. But this is one thing that you will run into. This is also a carryover from Model T. This was for assembling the old Model T when he assembled it into the chassis. If you put floater motor mounts in, this gets in the way of your rear mount. You have to take a hacksaw and cut this off. But just be aware of the early and late covers. This one I've already marked with the spacing, the top and so forth, so that they will match. Anyway, if you turn it around any other way, you don't get a match. Okay, now we'll take the front off.
And it's just those 4 bolts?
Yeah, just 4 bolts.
They're all the same length?
Yes, these are all the same. There's just lock washers under these. Okay, here's the last bolt out. I'll just give it a little tap. You notice this front bearing retainer is also the device that holds your clutch throwout bearing, the sleeve. Oh, there's also a little hole in here on this protrusion that holds the clutch return spring. And also it has a notch in the gasket and there's a hole in the bottom. Okay, there is a labyrinth inside here. Any oil that does run off of the end of the shaft will drip in here and then run back through the hole and back into the transmission. So when you put this gasket on, you've got to make sure you get that there lined up and a hole lined up. Okay, now the transmission itself, it's a very, very easy one to get dismantled, mainly because of the type of bearings that he uses in it. There's 2 ball bearings in it, large one and a small one, and caged roller bearings. And later, regular American transmissions and whatnot, these were all individual little ball bearings that you'd have to put into the gears with grease to hold them in place, and it was quite a chore, but this makes it very simple. You make sure you got there's 2 small bearings and 1 long bearing. There's another one down in the cluster gear and a large one in the rear. It's a little bit longer than the others. And when you do, one of the biggest points of wear on a transmission is the snout or this pilot bearing collar on the main input shaft. And if that's worn, you have to replace a rather expensive gear. If all else is good, if this bearing surface is good, if the gears are all good, you can have this sleeved. You can have it machined down and a sleeve put on it. That's very much recommended because it is rather expensive gear. All right, here's an example of a very, very badly worn pilot bearing shaft. And this one actually came in to be repaired because of this. This was so bad, and the shaft up and down so much that it made the clutch chatter like you wouldn't believe. It was almost shaking the fenders off. So this got replaced. The rest of the gear was usable. If we could have had it sleeved, we would have. But there's no one around that does that in this area. So, okay, then the main shaft comes out the same manner. It just slides out of the case. Ball bearing in the back. This is the first reverse gear. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the first reverse gear, the big one. And this is your second high gear. High gear when it's all the way forward, second gear when it's in this position. You just slide them out. Main shaft, bearing. This is first reverse. Both of these shift collars go on the inside. They face each other when they're together. This gear slides from the first gear on the cluster gear. If you could see that down. That one. And it slides over to the reverse idler gear. That little one right there. So that you can back up. This is the second high gear. That goes from the second gear here, this gear right here, and it slides forward and engages the input shaft. The gears are internal and external on this one, and they just fit together. When you get a very badly worn transmission, this bearing's worn, this bearing's worn, these things will wear after a while. As you step on the gas and come off of it, the shaft tends to rock back and forth, and the next thing you know, it hops out of gear. And that's what makes them jump out of gear more than anything. These particular parts are worn, these sections. Now the rest in there, you have the reverse idler and a cluster gear, and they just tap out. Just tap the shafts out. Okay, how to get a bigger hammer. Okay. That's the cluster gear shaft. This, of course, is a new one. I'll show you all the old stuff as we go. And the cluster gear, or the reverse idler, this little guy down here, you just have to pop this shaft out the back. Okay, there's just one thing I missed. And that's this little black back retainer. There are slots in the shaft, and a flat spot on a cluster gear, and they just fit right in there and keep the shaft from, they can't go forward because it's against the bell housing here, and this one can't go forward because there's a piece of case in a way. And although the reverse idler can't move because it's entrapped from moving forward aft. The main shaft can't go forward because it's bolted against the flywheel, or the bell housing. Okay. Now that's out. Okay, reverse idler. This is a later reverse idler. It's got a hole drilled in it. This is a late reverse idler shaft. It has the skinny lock plate on it. This is the early lock plate. This would fit in here. We had to get another one. Oh, it's being painted. Okay. And that has been replaced. This shaft was one of the modifications they had in a transmission. The early one was drilled. There was no hole in the gear, and it had a little cup on the end which would accept oil, and it would go down and lubricate the reverse idler gear. But that was a modification. The cluster gear is the two roller bearings, and this has a spacer. The original main cluster gear, the spacer was ground into the gear itself. It did not have that spacer. So when we bought this gear, we had to get the spacer along with it. Also, the case was changed early on in 28. It changed in November. If you look down inside, see these little bosses on the gearbox here and here. Does that show?
Yep.
Okay. These were made larger, and the gear just ran right up against the case. The early ones, though, they were ground out a little bit more, and they had 2 bronze friction washers in there. But the fact that this is a spur gear, and there's no thrust pushing the gear fore or aft, there was no need for that machining or part. So consequently, anytime the part was not needed, it was eliminated. Another modification on the case, see little snap rings in here. The early cases, this was a machined shelf that was in here. You did not have this removable snap ring. So that was in the early case. And also the real early cases, there was a large insert inside of the reverse idler gear shaft. I don't have one of those to show you. But that's about it. Okay, show you what's been replaced in this transmission. I think this is one of the things we almost missed. I think it was Seth, the owner here, was looking at it, and we were showing him all the little fine nooks and crannies, or all the little pits that take place in the gears, and he finally found one here on the main shaft. It was right there, so it's not worth putting this back in. It looks great. This will make a nice clutch aligner when you do clutch work. You can put that in your, whatever it is, your mobile that you're building. Okay, this is the second high gear. It's all gold up. Second and high, this is the one that wears the most in the transmission, along with the gear, its matching gear on the cluster. This is the second gear. Okay. That is, what's first reverse? Oh, first reverse was good, even though the cluster had a mark in it. The first gear, this is the original. This is what we took out. See, there is a little bit of wear on it, but it's in perfectly good shape. There's no pits or anything on it. Okay. And of course, the bearings, you usually always replace those as a matter of course. These are the roller bearings. There's one up in the main shaft, one in the front of the cluster.
They're different sizes, right?
And the longest one goes in the rear of the cluster. That's reverse gear and first gear. That's got the most pressure on it when you're pulling a dead load. All right, the cluster and the cluster gear and the reverse idler shaft were in serviceable shape, but the fact that I wanted to put in the new, these transmissions tend to leak. A lot of these holes in the back, I guess anybody that owns a Model A knows this, is where that little lock plate goes in, and they dribble through here. They make a gadget that you could put on top of here that closes it all in with a longer bolt and so forth. But this is what you can also do. You can buy the shaft with an O-ring seal on it. And this is what I elected to do on this. No, you don't need the gadget to put on the back. Same thing with the cluster gear shaft. That has an O-ring as well. And then this uses the new skinny lock.
The thinner lock
plate.
Right.
Okay. Of course, you replace all these are the slingers that are on, or the shields that are on the bearings. When they go on the shafts, they just rest against, this will be toward the inside of the transmission where the grease is. You do want a little bit of grease to get in it to lubricate the bearing, and then the rest, like in the front, it recirculates down into the case, In the back, if any does get out, it gets into the universal joint. So, there's a big one in the back, a small one in the front. Now the new bearings that you will get will be sealed front and back. And what you do is you still use these shields. You pull one out and put it toward the inside of the transmission, and you use the shield on it so that it will get some grease, lubrication, and you could leave the seal on the other side, and that'll work fine. There's no need for the oil to come out of this side. And that's about it. Any small parts? We also rebuilt the shift tower. I think we'll make another video of that another day. I've got a whole bunch of top covers, and it's one thing that does sell good at Hershey, so I'm going to build some of those up and bring them with me. And this one was a little bit rough coming apart. I had to heat it, I had to saw parts off, grind away, and I'll also mention something else while we're here. When this is in the car, see the shaft sticking out here? You got when you install the transmission into the bell housing, you got a gasket around here. But the gasket goes up here, but the shaft comes right through it. So you've got grease, any grease that leaks out of this hole, and there's a hole in the bell housing. Nothing to stop it, and the oil will just dribble out of the hole in the bell housing. Especially if you've got poor grease in it that is foaming. The foam will run out of the breather hole in the back, the breather hole, and it will also run out of these. They make a gadget that goes inside the bell housing. It's aluminum block with two little canisters that go over this with O-ring seals, and that'll prevent any. You have to have the bell housing on first before you do this, and then you replace these two upper bolts and apply this piece that you have that I gave to you. Okay, and what wears on these are the little slots in the shift forks. They wear out so bad that you have to fill them up with weld and grind them back down to a 1/2 inch. And what also happens is the little ball that goes in between those forks wear out quite badly. In fact, they get so bad that when you're in one gear, they're spaced out so far that the shift fork can actually fall right out, and it just wobbles around on you. So this one, you can repair this. This can be welded up and reground, but for the price of it, it wasn't worth the effort. It's got a new shaft. Okay, what we're going to do now is start to reassemble the transmission. First, slip in the cluster gear. Make sure the bearings are in place. Short one, long one, spacers in between. Is align this with my little gizmo. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. Okay. Also, you may not be able to see it, may do, but if you can look close here, I cut a nice little round lead in here so that the O-ring will slip in without getting cut off. Now we can put the cluster in. Okay, now we're installing the reverse idler gear. Here's the short shaft. That one goes nice and easy. We're still dry. We'll worry about it later. It'll turn easy. Good. Take the main shaft. The one thing I did never mention before, these bearings have to be pressed on and off. Use that in a press, put a little pressure on them, press the shafts out. They're quite tight. First reverse gear. Second on high. Bearing in place. Nothing to it. Gasket's still there. Take our 4 special bolts. Now on that universal joint housing, I mentioned to you about the 2 wide bolt holes. But you could also tell the top and bottom from the grease fitting. That goes on the bottom. Gasket's in place. Okay. All right, backs together. Seth, you bought a new one of these, right?
Yes.
Oh, it came with a bolt.
Yes.
Okay, you will do that. Hey Dave.
Hey John, how you doing?
Make sure you use the bolt it came with. This bolt is too long.
Okay.
Okay? This one will end up touching one of the gears.
Well, I don't remember that.
And yeah, because this one was quite beat, so. You got another one, use it. Now, alrighty. Gasket. I just want to explain one more thing. As I said to you before, the shield goes on the inside, and there's a little lip in it, and that allows the grease to get into it. And this is the way the bearings come, with 2 of these seals on. You could leave this seal in place. Bearings in, and put it right together. When you put that little block in, Seth, you can tap these in a little bit. Just be careful you don't go too far.
Okay.
It should slide right in, but you can turn it if you have to. This one you could turn if you have to. And this one you could tap the front if you want to tap it back out a little.
Okay.
The reverse idly you can't, so just be careful with that one. I should, or you can take a screwdriver and pry it out. Just pull it out a little bit. Okay. Nothing else goes inside. Then I guess we could put the cover on it. put it on the right way. Okay. That's got it.
Okay, cover on.
Just a few more little pieces to put on here.
It's for the emergency brake?
Okay, that's the little ratchet. This is the emergency brake lever. And some of the stuff, I have to change the correct size of paper clip on this before we assemble it. So I'll be doing that. And Seth is going to leave this here for me. I do also have to safety wire this back end and install the universal joint. And that's about it. But what I'd like to show you while we're here is the differences of this old original one plate clutch and transmission as compared to the multiple disc transmissions. Just happen to have one here. This is a multi-disc transmission. It's pretty much the same. All the gears and everything are identical. The only difference is this front output shaft. Notice it's got a thread on it, and it's got a special seal in the front. It doesn't have the clutch throw-out bearing device on it. Well, this is what went. This was the multi-disc clutch that they used up until November of 28. These are all the discs, fiber discs, driven discs, throw-out bearing. Your fork of your clutch pedal rested right against this. This is the throw-out bearing. That goes on there. Washer. And a nut. Your safety disc. This had to be assembled all in the correct manner. Everything had to be lined up. There was a very definite number one disc that went in here. But if you had to overhaul these things, you needed some special tools. That's what activated this clutch. Was this spring that you could see in here? It's a real potent spring. And that's what you would compress to disengage it. And when you release the pedal, the plates would then come together. But this was a very good setup. But the reason it was changed was also very expensive. Because as these wore down, we'll go over here to the flywheels. This is the flywheel for the multi-disc clutch. And as you can see, that's one heck of a piece of machining. So when one of these things wore out, and usually when the discs were worn and everything, you had enough wear inside here, you had to change the whole flywheel. And I doubt if it was cheap. So with our conventional clutch, move to disc. This is the original style that they had from the multi-disc clutch on. This is a single disc. This is one of the later single discs with spring cushions on it. The original ones were solid center. It was a little harsher on the drive line. This is the face of the clutch. It usually lasted many, many, many years. And occasionally, if it did get too rough, too bad, you could send this out and have it reground down. You had to grind this surface, you had to grind this surface to match. Then the clutches went on. This part goes into the clutch assembly. And that was it. And rarely did you ever lose a flywheel. About the only thing would happen with this setup is the ring gears would go bad on the starter, but that could be changed. So, and that was about it. So these have been servicing us since November of 28. And that's what we have in our cars now. And now the later thing is with people getting their crankshafts rebalanced and counterbalanced, what they do is they lighten this flywheel, they cut this step right off, and they're using the 29 to 49 flat disc, a 3-finger pressure plate. So, and that was about it. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I did, and so did Lenny. So.